Thank you, Anna. We're very happy to help with the 5 chronos. That's my pleasure. Well done.
Percentage on the
Percentage, yes. So we're coming to the last speaker of today. We have Stuart Young. There he is. So Stuart was recently headhunted out of Chester Zoo into Twycross Zoo, and we're going to hear about his new plans there. And again, keep your questions to the end of the session. I think we're gaining time.
Thank you. Yes, as someone said, I'm Stuart Young. I'm the Conservation Programmes Manager at Twycross Zoo, and I'm going to talk to you about our strategy there, how it was developed, why we developed it, and a bit about what we're going to do with it. So just an intro to Twycross Zoo. So we're located in the kind of centre of England in pretty rural locations that map shows. We were founded in 1963 and then became a charity in 1972, so we're a dedicated conservation charity. We're kind of a medium-sized zoo, I would say, on a 40-hectare site, which includes a 6-hectare wetland nature reserve, which ties into one of our strategy goals, actually. We've got around 500 animals from around 100 species, pretty low number of individuals because we don't really have many invertebrates, fish and things like that. We're pretty mammal heavy, which links to us being the World Primate Centre, which is going to be used for a while, as we have the 4 taxa-grade apes. So we've got Bornean orangutans, Western lowland gorillas, chimpanzees and bonobos. I think we're the only zoo in the UK to have bonobos as well. We have around 600,000 visitors a year, which is increasing. And another thing to highlight that links into some of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is that we're developing a National Science and Conservation Centre. This is with UK government levelling up funds, and will be a centre for kind of conservation education, research, that will open hopefully at the end of next year. And then just to give a bit of background on our kind of, I say historic, the conservation work we were doing in the 10-year period up to 2023. It was largely based around kind of contributing where we could input staff expertise, which was a lot around veterinary work. We also contributed just under £500,000 towards conservation projects around the world in that period. We did a lot of conservation education work on the zoo site and kind of outreach stuff, so that reached over 500,000 students. And another big focus we had was on research, kind of using our zoo to facilitate research projects. A lot of that was on great ape species. That brings us up to last year, where we launched our conservation strategy. The conservation strategy was largely driven by having included it in these slides. I think Simon summarised it nicely earlier when he said it's about stopping doing random shit, essentially. That was one of our large drivers. So we developed this conservation strategy that has 6 key goals. I'll go through those goals in a bit more detail later on, but also just to point out that that's the point. That underpinning all 6 of these goals is research, education and training. Those aspects didn't kind of have their own goal, but they underpin the whole thing. So I'm going to talk a bit about what drove us to develop the strategy, how we developed it, and then what's actually included in it. So one of the main drivers was the fact that we're in a biodiversity crisis, as everyone knows, and a climate crisis, with a large number of species being lost. But also recognising that key role that zoos can play, our zoo and all of the zoos can play in kind of fighting that extinction of species. So we kind of looked at the conservation work we were doing, and recognised the need that we needed to increase the conservation work, increase conservation impact, and we were going to use a strategy to kind of guide that work and I guess hold us accountable to what we would lay out, what we wanted to do. We also had inspiration from other zoos who had done similar work with our strategies as well, and also the work by Sarah Spooner, Andy Moss and others, looking at the sphere of influence that zoos have. So this was looking at the areas that zoos can influence and should influence, ranging from kind of political things through to fundraising, education, all of those things. So we took their work and the areas of influence that they looked at and kind of did a gap analysis of our own institution and looked at the areas where we felt we were strong, where we felt that we were lacking, or we felt that we could improve. And then this was used as the basis to develop our goals, both paying off our strengths, but also looking at the areas that we were currently weak at, but we felt that we could improve. We then took that to develop the goals for the strategy. So this was done through a series of thematic workshops. So we had 3 thematic workshops looking at the different possible goals in different areas. These were originally with the management team, so kind of the senior lead team in the zoo. And this looked at the kind of examples within each of the areas that we identified that we wanted to work in, defining success, defining best practices, looking at examples from other projects and other zoos, and how we could kind of pull those together into what we could do and what we could contribute to. Following this, after these 3 workshops, there was a whole staff workshop. So the key thing here was kind of bringing in the whole zoo staff. So this is around 180 people, I think. So getting feedback from the whole zoo, but also kind of trying to encourage buy-in from the entire zoo. Key thing here as well, we looked at the kind of regional and international priorities of where we could fit in there, so looking at EPs, and where our in-house expertise and our previous experience kind of linked in with the priorities identified by those kind of wider kind of strategies. So then that led to the development of our 6 goals. So these goals range from working with species in situ, which is goal 1, ex situ I should say, then working in situ, which is goal 2, so looking at how we can kind of increase populations of species within the zoo, but also looking at working with the habitats and species in the wild. Goal 3 is largely focused around education and outreach and how we can engage with local communities and inspire positive change for wildlife. Goal 4 is looking at our role, the role of zoos in society and what role we can play there. So this is looking at kind of leveraging our role with local politicians, national politicians, but also the role we play within regional zoo associations and organisations like the ECN. Goal 5 is focused specifically on UK species and habitats. So just to point out with Goal 5, it was originally lumped into Goal 2, so as a wider in situ goal. But we recognised that with the UK being one of the most nature depleted countries in Europe and in the world, it kind of warranted its own goal to highlight the importance and the role that we can play there. And as I mentioned before, we've got a nature reserve on site, and that's where our nature reserve comes into that. And then goal 6 is looking at the zoo site and how we can become more environmentally sustainable. So looking at making future developments carbon net zero, and looking at overall sustainability on the zoo site. So I'll quickly run through each of these goals and a bit more of the details that are included within those. So within the first goal, so looking at the species we support in the zoo, that is looking at our role within EASA is one of the main things, and our role in EPs, making sure that we contribute to EPs, making sure that the species we have in the zoo overwhelmingly do contribute towards managed programs and are species that need that kind of conservation support in the zoo. Another key thing here is highlight that we included staff training and kind of building staff capacity within that. That's kind of a thread throughout all of the goals, is that we wanted to build up staff capacity to be able to kind of enact this work. So goal 2 is our kind of in situ goal. This, again, we want to build up staff capacity to do that. This is actually where my role came in, was largely focused around this goal. A large part of this is looking at how we evidence species recovery in our projects, how we best achieve kind of conservation impact with our limited resources. So this is looking at increasing the amount of support we give to conservation projects. So as you can see, we're looking at basically moving to support financially, annually, what we had supported over a 10-year period before, but really focusing on what we are supporting. So I think that's the key thing, is making sure we're delivering impact in projects. Goal 3 is our environmental education and conservation education goal. So this ties in very well to the development of the National Science and Conservation Centre that I mentioned before. So we're developing that centre. A key thing there is that we will deliver degree level courses as well as masters and PhD degrees with that centre. So we will be generating a whole new generation of conservationists, is the aim. But as well as that, we will also still be engaging with local schools, local communities in species conservation. Goal 4 is that goal around looking at the role of zoos and the roles we can play in kind of international organisations such as IASA, IUCN, and other associations, but also looking at how we can kind of leverage support for zoos from government, and also from the public. So a large part of this role was developed around looking at what do we see as the issues facing zoos, what potential issues facing zoos in the future, and how can we address those, and how can we kind of be proactive in shouting about those and shouting about the positive role of zoos. So I think a key thing here was including this as a goal on its own, that kind of importance of zoos and the important role that zoos play in conservation. As I mentioned, the UK and conservation of native species and native habitats got its own goal. So a large part of this was focused around managing 30% of our zoo land for biodiversity. We have the nature reserve, which goes some way towards that, but we need to increase that. The amount of land that we have that's kind of dedicated for wildlife and for biodiversity. This fits with the UK government's and the kind of international 30 by 30 targets. As well as just managing for biodiversity, we want to evidence an increase in biodiversity on the site. So we're doing population monitoring. We've got partnered with local organisations. We're doing transects for butterflies, other pollinators, birds, and small mammals. So we're looking at those key kind of indicator species to look at changes in richness and abundance over time. As well as that, we want to use our zoo expertise in kind of conservation breeding to breed and release animals. So we're working with local partners again to identify potential species that we could play a role in breeding programs for. So like I say, to kind of try and address the fact that we're such a nature depleted country, and also Leicestershire, the county that Twycross Zoo sits in, is particularly nature depleted county within the UK. And then finally is the sustainability goal. So this is included in the conservation strategy, but is covered by people from outside of the conservation department. So this is largely with the development of the zoo site, ensuring kind of energy efficiency, moving towards carbon net zero, and trying to address those kind of potential environmental issues that we have. So another key thing to highlight with the development of this strategy was that we aimed to make it collaborative. So all of the goals were developed to highlight contributions to global biodiversity targets. So this was highlighting how we could potentially contribute to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the targets within the Global Biodiversity Framework. We also aligned with the EASA Field Conservation Standards and the BIASA Conservation Guidelines to ensure we were kind of aligned with those regional and national zoo associations. The idea here is to enable and facilitate kind of collaboration between us and other zoos who are doing similar work. And also, particularly Goal 4 that I mentioned, we wanted to highlight the roles that we can play and do play within global networks like EASA, WASA, IUCN. So this was really about kind of adhering our plan to international standards, but also by doing that, hopefully making it easier to collaborate and compare and collaborate to other organisations. I think I'm a bit ahead of time, but just to wrap up, I think the key points I would make with developing a strategy is that it's a way to encourage kind of organisation-wide buy-in towards the conservation work that an organisation is doing. So in our case, a key thing we did was the all staff day that I mentioned, where it really ensured that buy-in from the entire body of staff into the conservation plan, and it's now constantly referred back to. It's a way for us to track our success and also hold us accountable to track any failures against the goals that we set out to achieve, and also it's a way to highlight that key and important role that we all can play in the global conservation of species. And also by kind of aligning with those international frameworks and existing strategies, we can hopefully highlight the collaborative nature of conservation and the role that we all play towards conservation of biodiversity. So yeah, thank you, and QR code if you want to read the strategy and more about our work.